Callum Lancaster thought he had mastered the art of control. His wealth, his power, and the women in his life all bent to his will. Liana Lancaster had once been his devoted wife, the perfect accessory to his billion-dollar empire. But when she caught him buying an expensive necklace for his mistress, everything changed. The woman he had underestimated was about to unleash a storm of vengeance so calculated, so ruthless, that it would leave him ruined in ways he never imagined. Liana Voss had everything a woman could dream of. At least that's what the world believed. Married to Callum Voss, a billionaire investor with a reputation for brilliance and charm, she lived in a sprawling mansion with a staff to cater to, her every need. Designer clothes filled her wardrobe, luxury cars lined the garage, and her social calendar was filled with exclusive events attended by the city's elite. But none of that mattered as much as the life growing inside her. 7 months pregnant, she had shifted her focus from the glamorous lifestyle to preparing for motherhood. She envisioned a future where she and Callum would raise their child together, creating a family built on love and trust. Lately, however, something had begun to feel off. Callum had always been a busy man, but in recent months, his late nights at the office had become more frequent. Business trips were suddenly extended by a day or two, and when he was home, he seemed distant. He barely acknowledged the nursery she had meticulously designed, brushing off any conversation about baby names or parenting plans. Liana reassured herself that he was simply overwhelmed with work, that the pressure of providing for their growing family was weighing on him. She told herself this repeatedly, even when a sinking feeling in her chest whispered that something wasn't right. It was during an ordinary afternoon that her perfect illusion began to crack. While reviewing household expenses, she noticed a recent charge on Callum's credit card, one that made her stomach twist. A purchase from an exclusive jewelry boutique, one of the most expensive in the city. Her breath caught as she tried to recall if he had given her anything recently. A necklace, a bracelet, even a pair of earrings. But nothing came to mind. Her birthday had passed months ago, and there was no upcoming anniversary. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. Perhaps it was a gift meant to surprise her later. Yet deep inside, a voice urged her to look closer. She pulled up the details of the transaction and saw the purchase date. Just 3 nights ago, when Callum had claimed to be in meetings until midnight. Liana's hands tightened around the tablet as she stared at the evidence in front of her. It was a simple purchase, yet it held the power to unravel everything she had believed about her marriage. A cold realization settled over her. If the necklace wasn't for her, then it was for someone else. And if Callum was buying jewelry, for another woman it could only mean one thing. Her heart pounded as she fought to control her emotions. Confronting him immediately would accomplish nothing. He was a master at deception, capable of twisting words and making her doubt herself. No, she needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. She refused to be the kind of woman who ignored the signs, who turned a blind eye to betrayal simply because it was easier than facing the truth. Memories of the past few months flooded her mind. The last-minute cancellations, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes, the way he always turned his phone screen away when she entered the room. They were all pieces of a puzzle she had refused to assemble. Until now. A plan began to form in her mind. She would not cry, she would not beg for answers. Instead, she would uncover the truth on her own terms. If Callum thought she was too blind to see what was happening, he was wrong. She had spent years standing by his side, believing in their love, believing in him. But if he had betrayed her, if he had taken advantage of her trust while she carried his child, then he had made the gravest mistake of his life. Liana knew one thing for certain. She would not be the helpless wife left shattered by her husband's infidelity. Whatever was happening, whatever secrets he was hiding, she would find them. And when she did, she would make sure that Callum Voss regretted every lie he had ever told her. Liana spent the next few days carefully observing Callum, noting every detail of his routine with a sharpness she had never needed before. She paid close attention to his behavior, the way he left the house in a hurry, how he avoided making eye contact when she asked about his schedule. He had grown sloppy, careless in his deceit, and now that she knew what to look for, the cracks in his carefully crafted persona became obvious. He wasn't just distant. He was guilty. Her suspicions were confirmed when she found an email notification on his tablet, a reservation confirmation for an intimate dinner at one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The date matched the night he had claimed to be stuck in meetings. That was all she needed. Without hesitation, she made arrangements of her own. If Callum was going to wine and dine another woman while she sat at home waiting for him, she would no longer be the trusting, oblivious wife. She would see it for herself. When the evening arrived, she dressed simply, blending in with the crowd as she positioned herself in a discreet corner of the restaurant. Her heart pounded as she waited, each second stretching into eternity. Then, he appeared. Callum walked in confidently, his tailored suit pristine, his hair perfectly styled. He looked exactly as he had on their anniversary nights, back when. He had still looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. But tonight, he wasn't here for her. A few moments later, she saw the woman who had stolen his attention, Ava Dorn. Liana recognized her immediately, a well-known socialite with a reputation for chasing wealth, young, beautiful, and always seen on the arm of powerful men. Callum greeted her warmly, placing a possessive hand on her back as they walked to their table. The sight of it sent a wave of nausea through Liana. This was not a business dinner, not an innocent meeting. It was a date. She watched as Callum leaned in, whispering something that made Ava laugh. The ease between them, the familiarity, told Liana everything she needed to know. This wasn't a fleeting affair. It was something deeper, something that had been happening for a while. The realization made her grip the edge of her chair, forcing herself to stay calm. She wanted nothing more than to storm over, to shatter the illusion he had created, to expose him in front of everyone. But she resisted. She wasn't here for a confrontation. She was here to gather the truth. Her patience was rewarded when she saw Callum reach into his pocket, pulling out a small, elegant box. He placed it on the table and slid it toward Ava, his expression filled with admiration. Liana felt her breath catch in her throat as Ava slowly lifted the lid, revealing a dazzling diamond necklace, the one she had found on the credit card statement. Sickening wave of betrayal crashed over her, but she didn't move. Instead, she took her phone, capturing the moment in a few discreet photographs. Evidence, proof of his lies. She had no idea what hurt more, the fact that he had betrayed her so openly, or the realization that he had never once looked at her the way he was looking at Ava now. Minutes passed, but Liana remained frozen, absorbing the scene in front of her. Every touch, every stolen glance, every secret smirk between them was another dagger to her heart. But through the pain, something else began to rise. Rage. Not the kind that led to impulsive outbursts, but a deep, burning fury that settled into her bones. Callum had underestimated her. He had made a fool of her, treating her like she was too naive, too devoted to ever suspect his betrayal. He had spent years building his empire, controlling everything around him, believing that he was untouchable. But he was wrong. Liana had the truth now. And soon, Callum would learn what it felt like to lose everything. Liana returned home that night with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. The pain of Callum's betrayal still lingered, sharp and unforgiving, but it no longer consumed her. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, and now she had a choice. She could wallow in heartbreak, allowing herself to be cast aside like an afterthought, or she could take control. The decision was easy. She spent the next few days preparing in silence, moving with careful precision as she pieced together a plan. Callum had built his empire on strategy and calculated moves, always staying one step ahead of everyone around him. But he had overlooked the one person who knew him better than anyone else. Liana had spent years at his side, learning his habits, his strengths, and most importantly, his weaknesses. He believed he was invincible, but he had left cracks in his armor. She would be the one to break him. The first step was ensuring her own security. She met with a lawyer in secret, reviewing their prenuptial agreement and financial holdings. As expected, Callum had structured their assets in a way that heavily favored him, ensuring that if she ever left, she would walk away with little. But there were loopholes, subtle details he had likely assumed she would never notice. With the right approach, she could secure enough to protect herself and her child. Next, she focused on gathering more evidence. The pictures from the restaurant were a start, but they weren't enough. She needed something undeniable, something that would destroy his carefully curated image. Callum's success wasn't just built on wealth, it was built on reputation. Investors trusted him, the media admired him, and the public viewed him as the perfect businessman with the perfect wife. If she exposed the truth in the right way, everything he had worked for would come crashing down. Patience became her greatest weapon. She watched his every move, tracking his appointments and noting when he left the house. Late-night meetings turned into weekend getaways, each one another betrayal hidden behind a web of lies. She hacked into his personal email, uncovering messages between him and Ava, filled with empty promises and professions of love. He had promised Ava a future, one where Liana no longer existed. The final piece fell into place when she found the offshore account. Hidden beneath layers of shell companies was a fortune Callum had been siphoning away, likely preparing for the moment he would discard her. The money was enough to secure Ava's future, to ensure that when he finally walked away from his marriage, he wouldn't lose a single cent more than necessary. But now, Liana had the upper hand. With everything in place, she set her plan into motion. She transferred evidence to multiple sources, ensuring that if anything happened to her, the truth would still come to light. She compiled her findings into a neatly organized file, a weapon disguised as paperwork. Then she made the first move. She leaked the affair to the press, planting the story where it would spread like wildfire. Within hours, the whispers of Callum's infidelity turned into a media frenzy, headlines speculating on the mysterious woman he had been seen with. Business partners grew wary, investors questioned his judgment, and the image he had spent years perfecting began to crumble. As expected, Callum remained oblivious, dismissing the rumors as insignificant. He had no idea that the true blow was yet to come. Liana wasn't just taking his reputation, she was taking his fortune, his power, and everything he held dear. By the time he realized what was happening, it would be far too late. Callum woke to chaos. His phone buzzed relentlessly, messages and calls flooding in from colleagues, journalists, and close associates. His name was plastered across every major news outlet, tied to a scandal he had never anticipated. Photographs of him with Ava at the restaurant, details of his secret offshore account, and whispers of his impending divorce circulated like wildfire. He had spent years constructing a flawless public image, only to watch it unravel overnight. At first, he dismissed it as a temporary setback. He had weathered storms before, and with the right damage control, this would be no different. But as the hours passed, the severity of the situation became undeniable. The business world was unforgiving, trust was currency, and his was running out. Investors were pulling out, questioning his ability to lead with integrity. Board members were furious, demanding explanations. He had underestimated Liana, believing she would remain the dutiful wife, too weak to fight back. When he finally confronted her, she was calm. Too calm. There was no anger, no tears, just quiet control. She had played her part perfectly, letting him believe he was untouchable, only to dismantle him piece by piece. and she wasn't finished yet. Liana had filed for divorce. But it wasn't a simple separation. She had ensured that every legal loophole worked in her favor. She exposed his hidden finances, proving that he had been preparing to leave her without fair compensation. The courts didn't take kindly to financial deception, especially when a pregnant wife was involved. Sympathy was on her side, and Callum found himself trapped. His accounts were frozen as investigators reviewed potential fraud claims. His company's stock plummeted, with shareholders distancing themselves from the scandal. He was losing control, and for the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The empire he had built with ruthless precision was crumbling, not from an external threat, but from the one person he had underestimated the most. Ava, sensing the inevitable downfall, distanced herself immediately. She stopped answering his calls, removed any traces of their connection from her social media, and denied any involvement. She had been in this game long enough to know when to abandon a sinking ship. Liana, meanwhile, moved swiftly. She wasn't interested in dragging the battle through lengthy court proceedings. She wanted results. She leveraged every piece of evidence she had, negotiating a settlement that left Callum with barely enough to hold on to his company. The once mighty billionaire, who had orchestrated every move in his life to maintain power, was now at the mercy of the woman he had betrayed. The media continued to tear him apart, portraying him as the cheating husband who lost everything. Business analysts speculated whether he could recover, while former allies turned their backs on him. He was no longer the visionary entrepreneur, he was a cautionary tale. Liana, on the other hand, emerged stronger. She secured financial independence, ensuring that she and her child would never struggle. She reclaimed control of her life, stepping out of Callum's shadow and into a future where she was no longer defined by his name. But her revenge wasn't just about money or reputation. It was about showing him that he had never truly had power over her. He had believed he could discard her, replace her with someone younger, more desirable. Instead, he was the one left discarded, alone, and ruined. The final blow came when Callum realized that despite everything, Liana wasn't bitter. She wasn't dwelling on vengeance, she was moving on. And that, more than anything, was what truly broke him. Callum sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the city skyline that once symbolized his success. The towering buildings, the flashing lights, the streets below, none of it felt the same. Just weeks ago, he had been at the peak of his power, a man feared and respected in the business world. Now he was a cautionary tale, whispered about in boardrooms and dissected in the media. His phone, once flooded with messages from influential figures, remained silent. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. The fallout had been swift and brutal. His company was on the verge of collapse, with investors pulling out faster than he could recover. The board, once loyal to him, had turned against him, citing instability and lack of trust. His offshore accounts, the ones he had carefully hidden, were under investigation, and he faced potential legal consequences. Every carefully laid plan had backfired, and the woman he had once considered weak had orchestrated his downfall with terrifying precision. Liana, meanwhile, was thriving. She had secured a multi-million-dollar settlement, walked away with prime assets, and ensured that their unborn child would be well taken care of. She had become a media sensation, the scorned wife who had outsmarted the billionaire. Sympathy was on her side, and people admired the way she had handled her betrayal with grace. Even those who had once sided with Callum now viewed her as the true victor. He tried reaching out to Ava, desperate for someone to stand by him, but she had vanished. She had deleted her accounts, cut off all contact, and left no trace of their affair. She had seen what happened to men like him when they fell from grace, and she wasn't going to let herself be dragged down with him. As the weeks passed, Callum realized the full extent of his isolation. Former friends avoided him, business partners, refused to take his calls, and the media continued to tear him apart. His fortune had dwindled, his reputation was beyond repair, and the future he had envisioned for himself no longer existed. He had always believed that wealth and power made him invincible, but now, stripped of both, he saw the truth. He was just another man who had lost everything to his own arrogance. Liana, on the other hand, had moved on. She had relocated to a new city, away from the remnants of her past. She had started her own business, using the settlement money to invest in a future that belonged solely to her. She was no longer just Callum Lancaster's wife. She was Liana, a woman who had reclaimed her identity. She had no interest in revenge beyond what she had already done. She didn't care to see him suffer, didn't waste energy on bitterness. She had won, not because she had destroyed him, but because she had freed herself from him. Callum, left with nothing but regret, finally understood the depth of his mistake. He had spent his life believing that control was the ultimate power. But in the end, the real power had belonged to Liana, the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had betrayed, the woman who had walked away without looking back.